Hello, my friends. Welcome back to the Good News. I'm your host, Elisabeth Gunawan. Today we've got not one, not two, but three esteemed members of the college joining us here. As you know, we've just come back from 2 weeks of festivities. It was Easter. We just spent 2 Sundays eating cream eggs on our desk, ugly crying. Just me. Existential crises aside, let's welcome our guests. We've got Emmy Stavropoulou, Marnie Howlett, and we've got Daniel Heymann. Welcome, guys.
Hi, Elisabeth.
We can have you guys introduce a little bit about yourselves to our friends listening to us right now. Maybe from Emmy.
Yeah, sure. Well, hello. Thank you very much for having me today, and thank you for the introduction. My name is Emmy Stavropoulou. I originally come from Athens in Greece. I've been in the UK since September 2014, live in London House and the college librarian. I'm currently finishing my PhD in ancient Greek literature.
Amazing. So if you see also Charles Parsons posting on Facebook, basically that's Emmy.
Yes,
so
that's me.
I feel like you haven't heard of her, you probably have. We've got Marnie as well.
Yeah, hi, welcome. Thank you so much also for having me on the show or the podcast today. My name is Marnie. I'm a third-year PhD candidate at the LSE in the Department of International Relations, and I'm originally from Canada, but I've been in London since September 2017, living in London House as well.
And we've also got Daniel.
Hello. Well, you just saw the merits of marriage. I just got my cup of tea from my wife. So good morning to everyone. I'm Daniel Heymann. I'm a PhD student at King's College at the Department of Law. I'm specializing in international public law. And I think in relevance to this, I'm from the Jewish side of things. So when we'll get talking, that will be probably my focus. But I'm very excited to be here. This is a very nice idea and I'm very happy this is happening.
So just in case this podcast goes live without the video, I just want to share that Daniel also logged in this morning under his wife's Zoom log on. So anybody should perhaps reconsider now. Well, thank you so much to all three of you for making time to be here and to share a little bit about some of your traditions, some of the things you do at home, some of the things you grew up with regards to Easter. And it'll be great actually to hear about some of those traditions are for you guys. Perhaps even what it meant has changed for you over the years. Perhaps Marnie, you'd like to share first?
Yeah, so I guess for all three of us, this past Sunday was an exciting holiday. So I'm part of the Ukrainian diaspora. I was baptized Ukrainian Orthodox. And so for me, Orthodox Easter has always been a special holiday. Similar to, I guess, Christmas, we follow a different calendar. We follow the Julian calendar. So that means that our holidays are off a little bit from what you would expect with Christmas and Easter. So this past weekend was Easter, and it was a little bit different for myself as I had originally planned to be spending it in Ukraine with some of my friends there. But instead, I celebrated it in my room in London House, which was definitely an experience for myself. I won't go into the traditions quite yet, because I'm sure the others will have similar things. But for us, Easter is a lot about the family, bringing the family together. It starts usually in early in the morning on Easter. Well, actually, it starts on Friday, on Good Friday, with a church service to honor Jesus passing away. It's quite of a sad service, usually in the Ukrainian Orthodox Church. You wrap Jesus in the shroud. People are actually on their knees quite a bit throughout the service, and when you walk up to the altar, you actually have to crawl up to the altar in terms of respect and honoring him. And then through this period, you fast, and you have fasted until Sunday morning when you break the fast with a service. Again, and this time it's his resurrection. So it's a happier service, lots of colors. The church has completely changed from the Friday till the Sunday. It went from dark colors, lots of black, to flowers, very, very colorful service. So although I didn't get to experience it here, as I was obviously in isolation in London House. I did manage to watch 2 services, one on Zoom in London and one also at my home church in Canada.
What about you, Emmy? That's really interesting, just hearing some of the different. Thank you for conjuring up all those images for us as well.
Well, indeed, it is very interesting, especially because, as you might know, even inside the Orthodox Church, there can be differences in terms of when holidays are celebrated. So Greece, Cyprus, Romania, and a few others, they use the revised Julian calendar, which to a large extent overlaps with the Gregorian calendar, which is broadly used in the Western world, which means that the Greek Orthodox Church goes both ways. So Christmas we celebrate with the rest of the world on the 25th of December, unlike the Russian Orthodox Church. Whereas Easter, we overlap with the rest of the Orthodox Church. So yes, anyway, for us, like Marnie mentioned, Easter is probably the biggest celebration among the Orthodox Church. It's very much about bringing family together. It is celebrated actually even more than Christmas. So for Greece, essentially, so like Marnie said, we have a very strict fasting period of 40 days before Easter. Then on the last week, which we call the Great Week or the Holy Week, we go to church every day. There's a different kind of celebration of the Christ's sufferings. And then it becomes more intense. Let's say the Easter begins on Good Thursday when we dye or we paint red eggs. That's a very famous Greek Easter tradition. Then, and on the same night at church, we do the crucifixion of Jesus. Then Friday morning, Good Friday, they take them down from the cross. And then, like Marnie said, we have this kind of morning hymns, and people go, sometimes they crawl to the altar to pay their respects to Jesus. Then at night, we have what we call the Epitaphios service. So the whole neighborhood gathers around the church, and the priest with some other people take out the altar, and they walk it around the neighborhood, and the whole neighborhood follows with lit candles, like a funeral procession, let's say. On Good Saturday evening, we have the resurrection liturgy. So the priest gets out the holy light, and then at 12, the bells ring and we say Christos Anesti, which means Jesus resurrected. There's lots of fireworks in the sky, and that is when we break the fasting at midnight on Saturday. And then, of course, we have the very, very, very elaborate Easter meal, as you can imagine. This year, like Marnie, I celebrated it in my room in London House. But I was lucky enough to have 3 resurrections because I have family in Athens, which is 2 hours ahead. So I had the resurrection with them. And then family in Luxembourg. There's quite a bit of a Greek community there. So I had Easter with them too. And then at midnight BST time, I also watched the broadcast service. So it was actually quite good. I cannot complain.
Did you try to cook up a storm on the London House 4-floor buttery?
No.
It's challenging, I can see.
Yeah.
Well, it's a bit an odd question for me because for me, Easter is something that never existed. I celebrated, if you want to call it Easter, for the first time now here in London. I had a little chocolate bunny from the supermarket, which was very interesting for me. But it is fascinating for me to see what you talk about and understand where your traditions come from, and I'm pretty sure you yourselves don't quite know what it is, because Easter is an entire internal Jewish dialogue from 2,000 years ago. So maybe later on we can delve deeper into that, because I think it might be quite interesting for you to see where all this comes from and why do you do what you do. But for me, it's very interesting just to hear how it works on the technical level.
I think it'll be good as well for you to share a little bit about what the tradition of Passover is for you, understanding, because what will be interesting with this discussion is seeing what emerges to be different and what emerges to, in some ways, to be fundamental in the way that we celebrate traditions.
Well, in a way, and this is a fascinating thing, in a way, the tradition you were just talking about and it's true to almost most Christian denominations I can think of. Definitely the Orthodox and the Catholic for sure. It's interesting because they are in many ways still continuing the Jewish temple traditions that ended for Jews 2,000 years ago. And the Christians are still doing it, which is very interesting. All the way the altar is, why do you even have an altar? What is an altar? Why are you celebrating the resurrection? Why is it such an important point? Because you could argue that there are lots of important moments in the life and the passion of Christ. Why is the resurrection such a critical moment that you're celebrating? And look how complicated this all is, right? You've got, as you said, you have the first days of the, I don't know the word you call it, but as both of you just said, you've got the first days of the sadness, let's call it, and then you said it switches, transitions from the black to the flowers, right, Emmy? That's how you described it, from red eggs to celebration. And I don't think most of the Christians here ever stop to ask themselves, why do we do this? And what is this? Not just in the level of what are we celebrating, but why are we celebrating? And the why is very interesting. And I'm sure if you want, we can go deeper into this, but to just sum it up before even discussing, a pre-sum up is that this is all an internal Jewish debate. This is all inside Judaism, and it's very hard maybe today in 2020 to remember this. But if we went back to the time of Christ himself, there is no such thing as Christian. They're all Jews. The St. Paul later, after the resurrection, goes and starts preaching to what they call the Gentiles, which is the world. That's why the Catholic Church is called the Catholic Church. Catholic means global. Right, so the idea is until Christ, it's all about the Jews, and now the message or the grace, depending on how you see it from which denomination, is now spreading to the world. And non-Jews are called Gentiles as far as the Jews are concerned. So all of this issue is an internal Jewish debate. So the Last Supper is Passover, and Passover is an extremely important date in Jewish philosophy and religion, for many reasons. Number one, it's also a celebration of freedom and everything, etc. But more importantly, it is one of the three most important days of the year as far as the temple is concerned. The Jewish temple that was destroyed in 70 AD by the Romans. So it was destroyed after Jesus. So all of this story that we're talking about, the resurrection, Pontius, right? I'm saying correctly?
Pontius Pilate, yes.
Pontius Pilate. All of that is happening while the temple is still functioning. And why is this important? And I'm trying not to, still 2,000 years of history, 2 sentences is a bit difficult. The question is, and this is extremely important, the question is, who controls time? Is time an objective, ration thing that never changes? Or is it a relative thing that we humans can change and bring into effect? And this debate has been going on for many, many years. The Christian tradition keeps on the old Jewish tradition of believing that time is quite objective, whereas the Jewish mindset, at least from that time, started to diverge, and they started to believe that it's more subjective. And why is this all relevant to Christianity and Easter and everything? Because it's all about time. Why did time not end with the death of Christ? This is all what Easter is about, isn't it? It's all about the fact that he's not actually dead. Because if he was really dead, he would not have been resurrected. His resurrection is a proof that he did not actually die. And the reason why this is important is because the Messiah, which Christ is according to the Christian tradition, which is based on the Jewish tradition, because again, we're all talking about an internal Jewish debate. The Messiah cannot die. The Messiah's divinity will be proven by the fact that he is alive and not dead. So if Christ dies on the cross, he cannot be the true Messiah. Hence, he has to be resurrected, and that is why Easter is such an important, fundamental moment in the Christian calendar, because it's the proof of the divinity, at least as far as they're debating with the Jews of 2,000 years ago. All right, I talked a lot right now, but 2,000 years in a few sentences is very complicated.
I think what's interesting, though, is that Passover also as a feast, right? Before this conversation about the Messiah is about commemorating the freedom of the Israelites from slavery. It'll be interesting to understand what also the others think about what is actually fundamental about Easter. So personally, for me, for example, it's really wonderful hearing about all these traditions, because personally, I'm Chinese Indonesian with Catholics on my mother's side of the family and Buddhists on my father's side of the family, and essentially just very confused traditions. For me, Easter is just going to church in the morning, holding my grandmother's hand. But what I think is really interesting is this idea of freedom, actually, because in some ways, what is celebrated by contemporary Christians and Catholics today is this idea of freedom from sin that the figure of Jesus brings. For the Israelites, in some ways, it's freedom from slavery, which happened. But there's also this question of time, which also in tradition, because in traditions, there are a lot of practices that you do that are objective, and sometimes the what happens on the surface in terms of what you do symbolically, which is of course important, because if you think about it, you're committing to practices that has been done by your mothers and grandmothers and everything for centuries, and to commit to that same practice is really meaningful. But in some ways, the actual doing of it is maybe the superficial, but what's the essential? Perhaps how, just on a personal level, how this tradition has changed for you, you know, from maybe when you were a child and this was something that your parents did, and as you know, your personal beliefs change, or your personal traditions change, what has this continued to mean to you to celebrate Easter?
Well, personally, so for me, the traditions haven't changed. I mean, this year, clearly, I wasn't able to do as many things as I would normally have done with my family. But since I was a child, because Greece is a very, very religious country, so we do lots of religious studies as a mandatory part of our curriculum. So from age 8 until 17, we studied Holy Scriptures in depth, Old Testament, New Testament, and we get quite a lot of background about why everything is celebrated and where the traditions come from. So I always, I guess, even though my family personally was not very religious, as part of the country, I knew exactly why it was so important, and all the other kids did as well. So growing up, it was the kind of thing that you would do consciously in a way, like the whole family together, and it would be very clear why every day is important. I think that in certain ways, things are a bit more relaxed than they used to be. So the very, very strict fasting is no longer as widely implemented as it used to. So when my parents were growing up, they were not even allowed to eat any oil during the Holy Week. So they were basically eating lentils and beans boiled in water the whole week, which no longer really happens. Other than that, I would say the traditions have by large remained the same. And this is something that I quite personally like to continue to do. When I'm in Greece, it's better because I can do so with my family. So I can paint the red eggs with them, and we can go to the Epitaph service together and attend the hymns. Even now that I was alone in London and I wasn't able to physically go to church, and also I couldn't exactly roast lamb in my yard on Easter Day, that was another issue, but I still tried to do as many of those things as I could, because even though I'm not very religious myself, I like the philosophy of it, I like the tradition behind the history, the culture, and I also find that the underlying meaning is also very, very important. To a large extent, it is aligned with my personal philosophy towards life, the sharing, the love, and all of this. So yeah, I've tried to preserve my Easter to as much as I can in relation to what I used to have when I was a child, I would say.
It's really interesting also when you talked about just like having the altar carried around the neighborhood with people following with candles, because what's funny is I sometimes see that like experientially there's something shared between like a religious experience and like going to a rock concert. Even sometimes that sense of, which sadly we don't have right now in the world, right, that sense of just being in the same place with a lot of people committing to the same thing, that sense of togetherness, which I think is really powerful and really universal actually.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's one of the things that I like so much about Easter, that you would still go on Good Friday to church, well, had it not been, at least for the situation now, and you would bump into your old teachers from primary school, your old classmates from primary school, because it's the one time when absolutely everybody would be there, and you would be sharing everything from the morning atmosphere on Good Friday to the celebratory atmosphere on Good Saturday, when everybody's happy saying Christos Anesti. It is exactly this. It brings the community together. It brings people together. And that's honestly something I really, really love about it.
What about you, Marnie? Perhaps you'd like to tell us a little bit about like what this tradition means to you now and so forth.
Yeah, it's so interesting to hear Emmy speak, because I see so many similarities between the service itself. In the Ukrainian Orthodox Church, we again do, the procession around the church, the very, very similar things, even what we say. So we say Christos Voskres, which again means Christ is risen, which sounds very similar to the Greek version. So it's quite interesting to hear these similarities. And I think also for myself, Canada is a very multicultural, multi-ethnic, multi-religious country. And so because of that, we don't really have that same sense of community that you might find in other countries. So for many people, the diaspora communities or your national identity becomes very important to kind of find that sense of community. And so at least for myself, I grew up in a very, very tight-knit community, I would say, within the Ukrainian Orthodox faith, going to church regularly, going to Ukrainian Orthodox camp, Ukrainian dancing, Ukrainian choirs, things like that, where you saw these people regularly, but often around the holidays, so specifically Easter, it was those exciting times that you got to see people, very much like Emmy said, coming together, that sense of community, that everyone kind of understands the same celebration and you're there exactly like for the same purpose. Within the Ukrainian Orthodox tradition, we don't do red eggs like in Greece, but we do, I'm trying to describe them. They're called pysanky. So they're eggs, and what they're dyed eggs, but you use beeswax and you paint on these eggs. So with these eggs, there's different symbolism around the different colors that are used on the eggs, as well as the different designs that are then painted on them. On Easter morning, you put them into a big basket. I think it's an Eastern European thing, is preparing a basket for the church. But within this basket, each of the items that go in also symbolize something. So starting with a special bread that we make, which is called paska, which actually is from the Jewish tradition Pesach. Is that correct?
Pesach, yeah.
Pesach. Yes, and it's also from the Greek version of is it paska, Emmy? In Greek, yeah. So it's interesting how we see these three, but in Ukrainian Orthodox, it's called paska, and it's a sweet bread that we put in the sort of the center of the basket, representing Jesus Christ, kind of the bread of life. And so with that, you would also put in your pysanky, so your eggs, as well as meat, a sausage, butter, maybe some vegetables, horseradish, and each of these have different symbolism around different aspects of life, kind of goodwill, wealth. In tradition, the more abundant your basket was, it represented more financial wealth or wealth. And you take this basket to church, and during the service, or I guess at the end of the service, the priest will come and he will bless every basket. And then you would take that home, and that's what we eat for our lunch or your brunch with your family. In some Ukrainian Orthodox churches, you actually will eat that in the middle of the night if your service starts at midnight, like Emmy said. Those services, as soon as the service is over, you'll eat it as a community and share the basket, because it also represents the ending of the fast. So for many people, for 40 days, you gave up meat and cheese or dairy, many of these items that will be in your basket. So you celebrate by eating them on Easter morning or whenever your basket has been blessed. And in tradition, those items are never supposed to be thrown out. They must be eaten. And that's what you eat on this is the food, only food you're supposed to eat on Easter. And so this year I attempted for my first time to make paska in the third floor buttery, which was really quite successful. But it's something that I would share with my family. Usually we would have it together. I've made it before with my grandmother, but I'm definitely not an expert. So if anything, out of this isolation, I learned or I improved my Ukrainian baking skills. But yeah, so that's sort of, so for me, keeping those traditions alive are really important. I had originally planned to spend it, like I said, with my friends in Ukraine and for them to teach me their traditions and to see how the diaspora might be different than what is still upheld in Ukraine. But obviously I wasn't able to do that. But it was still nice for me to have the basket, to virtually bless it through a Zoom church service and my spray bottle, and just to sort of still feel part of that community. And I guess there is no real meaning, I suppose, in terms of that significance, except for myself. I suppose it's just, it makes me feel like I am connected to my community still, even though at this point we're all in different houses, we're all over the world. It still symbolizes that sense of community, that togetherness, that belonging to a group, and that those of us within the group understand each other and our traditions. So I think that's why it's remained important for me.
What's so interesting is what you said about the sensory aspects of the tradition. You're like, preparing food makes you feel this way, like smelling, bread baking in the oven, or even feeling like water has such deep symbolism in any tradition. Like all of those things affect you wherever you may be, and whether it comes from a spray bottle or from a 200-year-old device, and best of luck in finishing that basket. I'm sure as someone who lives alone in London house with one fridge, you understand what that feels like.
It is very interesting for me to see the similarities and potential differences between different communities of the Orthodox Church. We have sometimes similar-ish traditions, but they vary in the details. So I was wondering about the eggs. You mentioned that you don't paint them, but rather you paint symbols on them. Is that correct?
Yeah, so we have two eggs actually that go into the basket. So pysanky are eggs that you would dye and you use beeswax, and it's called a kiska, but it's sort of a tool that you use to paint onto the egg, and then you put it into another color. You continue to do that, and after that's done, you melt off the wax and then be revealed so that you can see the colors that were previously painted on the eggs. So ranging from yellow, orange, red, black, green, blue sometimes. All those colors will then be revealed once you melt off the wax. We also have a second type of egg that goes into the Easter basket, and those are called krashynka. You would take these eggs and you go around and you crack them with your friends. So each two people, I had to see that you can have a similar tradition.
Yeah, so for us, we paint red eggs on Good Thursday, but we don't actually smash them until Saturday night. And the idea is that, the egg symbolizes rebirth and new life, which is the resurrection of Jesus. And the red color we paint the eggs, even though, like most houses, we paint several colors, the original tradition is red to symbolize the blood of Jesus. And then we keep them around in the house, and on Saturday night after resurrection, then we like every two people take an egg and they're like Christos Anesti, and you smash them, and eventually you have like an inner battle in the house. So the person with the winning egg is supposed to be like, let's say, to have the blessed egg. Very traditionally, some people would keep the egg in the fridge or somewhere in the house until next Easter, but I personally don't do that.
We do a very similar tradition, except multiple colors. Here, I'm using turmeric to dye yellow, and they worked, but that was the only color that I managed to come up with in London House.
Well, so it's very interesting to sort of hear the different Easter traditions that do happen differently in different denominations, but they do have some sort of basic commonalities. And it's very interesting to see what I can relate to from Passover, the Jewish Passover, and what I cannot relate to. So some things are very clear, at least for me, that they come from the same place. For instance, on Palm Sunday, you call it?
Yeah.
Right? There's this tradition, as far as I know, all Christians do that, at least traditionally. They used to take the palms and start cleaning all the floors, right?
I think usually, I mean, this is only from Catholic school experience. They burn it and they use the ash.
Right, but so that's all right. So that's what I was referring to. I didn't get the specifics correctly. So for me, it reminds me of the Passover tradition of Passover is the spring. So it's all about cleaning the house and re-preparing it for the new year and the new spring. And so to do that, you have to clean up everything to the level where there's not even a crumb of bread or a crumb of anything in the house. And to make sure you do that, you sweep everything, you clean up everything, and then you burn it. Whatever you found, you burn. And then the egg issue. I mean, you all talk about the eggs. Passover, part of the ceremonial foods you eat is an egg as well. And it has full of symbolisms. And some of these symbolisms, of course, will be very similar. You know, it's talking about, because we're talking about spring and renewal and fertility. Don't forget, all these things come from pagan rituals, right?
Mm-hmm.
So spring always is connected with fertility and rebirth. But egg is also something which is durable. It's edible, but it's also hard. I mean, it's not exactly liquid, is it? When you boil an egg, it can become solid. So it is something soft that is also hard at the same time. And eggs also used to be considered not very sophisticated food. So it's also got to do with the simple life, the simple personhood. The poor people would eat the eggs because that's a very common food they can find. So everyone can find an egg. And all these things are very, very interesting because I can see a lot of these similarities. And then, for example, again, I don't know if all Christians do that, but at least I saw here in England last year, they have this thing with the children, right? They run around looking for little chocolates, right? Or is that a Orthodox thing as well?
No.
Easter bunny? No, okay. Okay, I don't know who does what. But for me, it resembled, for me, what I remember as a child, that Passover, all the adults will be talking and doing their thing. And all the children will be running all around the house trying to look for the afikoman, which is a tiny piece of ceremonial bread, let's call it, that the grown-ups hide, and then the children have to find it. So all the children are running around trying to find this tiny little wafer. So it's very similar to the chocolate thing. I think the chocolate was a much better update on that tradition. I think children would rather have chocolate than a bad piece of stale, unleavened bread.
It's really interesting what you're saying, which is basically that all these traditions are a celebration of what's fundamental in a way. And all of the things that you've mentioned, even the different sensory aspects of it, the way that you engage children, the foods that you eat, they're all actually in a way so fundamental even until now. And that's what makes them so universal. That's what has, that's the reason why we still do it today, perhaps in some ways. Even with, you know, of course, you could argue that a lot of these holidays have become really commercialized and it's just a way for waitrose to make more money. But at the same time, what it is it's a universal celebration, whatever it is that you believe in, because you will still engage in those practices because they're human and they're fundamental. I'd like to play a game with everybody. And the rules of the game are basically you can chip in whenever you'd like. And I want you to imagine that if you were to wake up, perhaps not in good enough college, perhaps with more of your family around you, what are some of the things you hear, you see, you taste, and maybe even that you feel throughout the day of Easter or Passover?
I'll start because maybe chronologically.
Yeah.
Passover is always, for me, childhood and Passover is the same thing. When I think of childhood, I usually think of Passover and vice versa. It's always the beginning of spring, and you have a very long vacation from school. And it's always about, you suddenly meet all your cousins. All your cousins suddenly show up. And all the kids are running around in the street without adult supervision because all the adults are too busy cleaning the houses and preparing for the Passover. And it's always, as a child, it was always a very magical time because suddenly the pools are open again and the beaches are open again because, of course, it's always at the same springtime, right? And for me, Passover was always a very, very fun, carefree liberating even sort of time of the year, because as a child, again, there is no adult supervision. The adults are just too busy to care about you, and because you're with all your cousins, no one really cares what you're doing. The kids are playing outside. And that's why for me, Passover is always a very childhood memory for me. It's always related to childhood. That's how I feel about it.
The sound of your cousins bickering.
Usually beating me up, yeah, but that was part of it. And then I grew up, then I beat up the younger ones. It's part of the tradition. And
but
sneaking into the pool without paying, that was also a big tradition in my family.
And also this like wonderful energy. Thank you for sharing that.
Unfortunately, when Easter falls in Canada, it's usually still snowy. So.
Oh wow! Okay.
So I mean,
so no pool for you.
No, even in April, possibly May, there's usually still snow. So no pool.
Wow, really? Okay.
No pools. Usually, like I said, with the blessing of the baskets, you hope that you can do that outside around the church in the church's yard. However, again, it depends on the weather, and you may have a snowstorm that day, so you may be stuck inside or in the hall of the church. But for me, Easter, when I think of Easter, I think of one is getting up really, really early, because our service, or at least at my home church, starts at 5 a.m. So I always think of being tired. You fast, so you're hungry, but you can't eat until after the basket is blessed. So as a child, I remember being grumpy and tired and going to church, and you just want to sleep. But then as the service goes and it gets closer to the end and it's full of people, many of your friends, your cousins, the mood really lifts, and it's a happy time, and you see your friends. Chocolate is not an Orthodox, or at least Ukrainian, food item. However, now it's become sort of normalized in that when you're blessing the baskets, many parents and friends will exchange chocolates and just give each other small items like that. So that will become part of it. But just taking your basket and seeing all your friends, and then taking it home and spending the day with your family and your cousins, your extended family, your grandparents. It's very similar childhood memories of just spending time with family, and family that you don't often see very often. Yeah. Getting together and just spending the day just together, just eating nonstop, and just, sharing that time together.
So basically, depending on your perspective, either waking up really early and having a late brunch, or staying up really late and having a really late supper.
But there's a big commonality about waiting for the food and being grumpy about that, because the Jews, if you ever go to a Passover, and I'm sure the apostles and Jesus went for the same thing, because they were celebrating Passover. You sit, all the food is ready, and then you spend an entire hour doing the ceremonial readings and singing, and no one wants to do it, and everyone just wants to get over with it, and everyone's irritated, and everyone's hungry, and then you start drinking before you actually started eating, and it's like the whole thing is to eventually get to the stage where we finally do eat. It's a sense of relief more than anything else, and I think the Orthodox tradition you're referring to, Marnie, is trying to have the same sort of vibe to it, maybe in that sense.
Yeah, for us it's a little bit different, because we break the fasting at midnight of Saturday. So by Sunday we are already free to eat. So I would say for us the grumpiness would be Saturday night mostly. And then my image is from, again, I've associated Easter with childhood a lot, because the standard memory would be waking up, and my mom would be nervous, making sure that everything would be ready in time, either to go to my grandparents' house, where all the aunts and uncles and cousins would go, or they would come to us. And you can smell, like you open the window and you can smell lamb, because everybody's roasting lamb in their yards. And, you go and the neighbors wave, and everybody more or less on the street. So sometimes when we were kids, like the neighbors would take like a bit of the lamb as it was roasting and give it to us. And then, you would see the whole family, and everybody would be like, oh, Kalo Pascha, which means good Easter. And we would sit on the table and have the lamb and have all the food, smash some more eggs. And at this time, Greece tends to have very good weather because it's spring. So usually it would be super sunny, and you roast out in the yard or even eat in the yard. It's very nice. Basically family, sunshine, loads of good food. That's the strongest part of Easter memory for me.
Thank you so much, guys, for kind of sharing so much about some of your personal experiences. It's so insightful, and I think it's so it's such a wonderful conversation to get to hear, especially because this year Easter and Passover is so different for so many of us. But it's not a good news episode without some of our rapid fire questions. Rapid fire questions. The rules are you answer just as fast as possible, no judgments, just as honest as you can. I'll ask the question, and how about we'll go Emmy, Marnie, and Danielle in that order. So just go for it. Okay. Rapid fire questions. Coffee order.
Plain latte for me.
Black Americano.
White Americano.
Cocktail order.
Oh, porn star martini.
Gin and tonic.
Gin and tonic, yeah. Or dirty martini. Yeah, that'll be nice as well.
Ooh. Apple or clementine?
Ooh, that's a difficult one.
That's not fair. That's not a fair question.
Because I usually have a clementine and an apple after my food.
Apple
okay,
or
apple.
Clementine.
This is really not fair, but if I had to choose, I'll go for clementine. But it's really not fair. This is a very painful question.
Apple or Android?
Android.
Oh,
Apple.
Android, for sure.
Ninjas or pirates?
Ninjas.
Pirates.
Ninjas.
Stock market or farmer's market?
Farmer's market.
Farmer's market.
Farmer's market. We're all academics. If we cared about money, we would not be here, would we?
Yeah.
We're going to get investors next episode. BLT, it could be tofu bacon or turkey bacon, or BTS.
What's BTS?
Okay. A BLT is a bacon, lettuce, and tomato sandwich. As you guys probably know, BTS is a K-pop band who matches the great Michael Jackson in good energy and talent. BLT or BTS?
BLT?
I have no idea what the other thing is. So
Tiger beer or Tiger Lily?
Tiger Lily.
Tiger Lily.
Yeah, I'll go with the cat. I like the cat. She doesn't like me, but I like her.
Yeah, I feel the same way.
Man bun or brioche bun?
Brioche bun.
Brioche bun.
I'm not sure what. Okay, I'll go for bread. Well, I'm not sure what the other one is, but I'll go with bread.
Wow, 3 PhD students and no man bun. We'll also have an episode next.
Okay. You know what? I used to have long hair and I miss it, so I'll go with the man bun.
Ooh.
2 for brioche, 1 for man.
Yeah.
Thanks so much, guys. This has been really wonderful. Thank you for making time. It's actually 10 a.m. right now, so these guys woke up nice and early in true Easter tradition, Easter and Passover tradition.
Thank you very much, Elisabeth, for the invitation, and see you and Marnie and Daniel as well. It was really, really very interesting hearing about your traditions and learning so much.
Yeah, thank you all as well. I've learned so much. I'm actually going to go read up on Passover now and Jewish so I can understand a bit more how this works.
Marnie, you mentioned something about eating horseradish?
Yes.
Can you just, before we finish, can you just explain that?
Yeah, so horseradish is another item that you would put. It's quite a big part of the Ukrainian tradition just generally. At many events you'll have it. But apparently it is symbolic of Christ's passion and the blood that he shed. That's the symbolism around it. Usually it's mixed with beets, so it'll be a red color, also so that it tastes a bit better. But it's often, it's added to your basket and often eaten on the bread. Once you slice up the bread, you'll often put a horseradish and eat it. Is it symbolic?
Yeah, horseradish is extremely symbolic. Yes, it's part of the Passover ceremonies, and I'm pretty sure Jesus would have had, in the Last Supper, he would have had, not the bread, he definitely did not have bread in the Last Supper, but he definitely had something which would have been the equivalent of horseradish. So next Easter, when you have horseradish, you can know that Jesus himself probably needed a glass of water as well. But again, without the bread. I'm sure there was no bread in the Last Supper.
What about sausage, ham, bacon, or salt?
Sausage, ham, and bacon. Wow, no. I'm willing to bet my eternal soul on the fact that Jesus never, ever in his life had sausage or ham. I'm willing to, no, that's not part of the tradition.
Is lamb or any meats part of the tradition?
Lamb is an extremely big part of the not the Passover tradition as we have it today, but the lamb is not, Emmy was talking about the lamb thing, that everyone's cooking lamb around you. Lamb is a very, very important point, right? Because the entire point of Jesus is that he is the last lamb. You don't need to continue with the temple worship anymore because he is the Alpha and the Omega. He is the best and the last sacrifice. And the sacrifice of the temple wasn't just lamb, but lambs was a big part of it. So that's why you eat lamb. It is extremely symbolic, even though it didn't really survive in the Jewish tradition today.
Exactly. We call it, like in the Orthodox Church, Jesus is referred to as amnos to Theou, which means the Lamb of God, in the sense that he sacrificed himself for us, which is why the main dish on the actual Easter day is lamb, to remind us, on Easter day of the ultimate sacrifice that was made for us.
It's interesting because in the Ukrainian tradition, you don't have lamb, but people carve your butter into the shape of a lamb. So in your basket, you will have a lamb that's the butter lamb. It's very, very popular. You would see in the baskets. So that's interesting. It's the same. Yeah, the lamb weaves through all of the Orthodox traditions.
I mean, we can keep on going because I'm sure every little tradition you can pick up on, we can sort of find a common ancestor, a common tradition ancestor.
Of course.
You talked about coloring the eggs red, and red denoting the blood of Christ. But I can also tell you that red was always associated with Passover because if you take the biblical story, the Jews in Egypt put blood of a sheep, by the way, on the doors so the angels of death will know not to affect their households. So it's all about the sacrifices, and I started with an abstract thing, so I'll just end with it. It's all about time, the concept of time. Is time linear? Is it not linear? Is it relative? Is it not relative? So I just think that it's very interesting that these people 2,000 years ago were having these, let's call it sort of proto-quantum physics arguments about what is time way 2,000 years before Einstein. So I think it's very interesting, and even people who don't respect the traditions because they are averse to religious texts and religion in general, let's just remember that a lot of the people who were dealing with theology back then would today be scientists, right? I mean, they just had no other outlet for their thing. So that's why all these things were very important and very sophisticated, the way they did the calendars and the way they did perceptions of time. And these are very interesting things. And if you want, maybe we can do that again in another time.
Sounds amazing.
Thank you for some of the really thought-provoking discussions that have happened, guys. Well, you've heard the good news. I'm your host, Elisabeth Gunawan. Tune in next time. We're going to have upcoming episodes. What was it that we said? On investing, symbolism, and what would please Jesus. Take care of yourself and each other.
Thank you very much. And happy, is that still a thing? I'm not even sure. No, it's probably finished by now.